I'm always pleased to be joined by brilliance and brilliance that is also wrapped in love. I want to introduce to our show for the first time Marianne Williamson, who is an American author, spiritual leader, political candidate, and activist. She has written 13 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers, and she most famously and recently ran for president in the Democratic primaries of 2020. Sister Williamson, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on.
The pleasure is ours. I want to begin with just who you are. And I know most people watching this absolutely already know who you are, but just in context of the reason I reached out to you, I see you talking all the time about the hard issues. And then you also talk about the need and the necessity for love in the midst of these very difficult issues. If you're like me, that probably is difficult when you consider how fatuous and ridiculous American politics can actually be. So let me just start with the $1,000,000 question. How do you balance maintaining love in a system that's so full of hate?
Well, if a system is full of hate, that means it needs love. I mean, if you're a doctor and somebody comes in with a wound, the doctor doesn't say, "Oh, that's so negative. It's so awful. You have a broken leg, but let's look at your elbow." If a system is filled with hate, it needs healing that much more. It needs the consciousness of that which is reparative that much more. So I look at something that is deeply corrupt and I think we need to go there. I don't look at something that's corrupt and think let's avoid it because it won't get less corrupt. It is, inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving until a direction of a counterforce. We can't look at the corruption and the toxicity and the genuine danger, potential danger of the current system and as a generation turn away and then die happy. It can't happen.
Right. I can't possibly, I say it all the time, it's like, I can't die yet. I gotta live because if I can't die happy knowing I'm living a broken system for my children and their children and their children. And if we're lucky, that we would have that kind of future. But we're in a system now that most certainly is on a collision course with disaster because it's rooted in things not just like hate, but rooted in greed. And part of your campaign really was speaking to that issue of greed and how it is breaking us and how it is breaking people. Talk about your campaign and how you came in certainly differently. You came in speaking differently. You were addressing issues. Matter of fact, you were one of the first people, if not the first person, to mention reparations on those debate stages. And you just came for it all. Tell us about that process and equally as important, the kind of pushback that the system gave you.
Well, the pushback the system gave me is very much aligned with what you were talking about a few minutes ago before I came on. The system has a pre-prescribed conversation, and it also has a pre-prescribed group of candidates that it has allowed into what it believes should be deemed qualified. And that has to do with people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the system that drove us into this ditch. The idea is that they're the only people qualified to lead us out of the ditch. So I did come in talking about things that everybody I know talks about. The fact that economic values have at this point replaced humanitarian values, that capitalism has become, over the last 40 years, so untethered to ethical consideration as to be a serious danger to life among people in our country, people in the world, and the planet itself. That this absolutely must change, or we are on our way to global calamity, the likes of which we are already flirting with. But the system, the political media industrial complex, and I think you were referring to that as well. They're not disconnected. They clearly are a boys' club that work together. They won't have it. And if you seek to challenge it, they have their ways of dealing with you.
No. Yeah, they have a big, broad tool set that they can use. And the very first line in their defense to protect this system from the people is that media industrial complex. The last line is the military industrial complex. If they just have to wield it out on us, they will. Would you speak then, because there is an undertone one of the reasons I think I connect with what you say so much is because the things that you say actually connect to how we survive as a species, how we survive in I want to say in perpetuity, because what we're doing right now is a recipe. I think people don't believe that this could be the last generation. I think people take for granted that our children's generation could be the last generation. But the way that we're behaving ourselves collectively, the way that we're engaging in this greedy system, the way we engage in these endless wars is a recipe. And the way we just completely disregard the environment is a recipe for our destruction. But I feel that one of your messages is how do we survive as a species? Could you speak on that?
Well, I totally agree with you. We are carrying on with a naive arrogance, forgetting the lessons of history. The lessons of history demonstrate that there have been great civilizations that have crashed and burned. And our civilization can crash and burn. We are collectively demonstrating behavioral patterns that are maladaptive for our survival. And in our case, not only the survival of our civilization, but as you say, of the species itself. And we all learned as children about how evolution works. The species will either evolve in such a case, will either mutate in such a case, or it goes extinct. Now, I do believe that which represents an evolutionary alternative, that which represents the collective mutation, is present among us. And I believe the people of this country, and I believe the people of the world, there is a critical mass of people. You can feel it. It's an aspirational yearning that is demonstrating itself everywhere. New ways of agriculture, new ways to deal with food, new ways to deal with economics, new ways to deal with business, new ways to deal with medicine. It's there. The problem we have is that the economic and political systems that dominate our political and geopolitical realities are stuck in the regressive mode of behavior. And they form as they are at present an obstruction when the entire purpose of the political institutions is to be a conduit for solutions.
Yes.
And that's where we are right now. And that's why so many of us are screaming as loud as we can.
Absolutely.
So, Ms. Williamson, my question to you would be, I know that you spoke about like in these times, to combat the negativity and the toxic is to show love and to, instead of run away from it, go towards it. It's pretty hard, especially as a person of color, a Black person right now in the country to, see it through that mindset, especially in these moments. So it's what else would be another option? Like, especially because mentally we're broken and there's always something coming up. The system is against us. We have this whole COVID-19 pandemic. It's against us, with us being the least to get the help and the assistance that we need. It's a lot. So, it almost sounds like it sounds good. I remember when I used to walk in that where it'd be like, love on it. But some people are just so mentally worn out and torn and just can't see it that way. So what would be another option? You know what I mean?
Well, first of all, we were talking a moment ago about the lessons of history. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. have already created the template that you're asking for. We don't have to create any new wheels here. It's the idea that we ourselves have to practice the love that we want to see dominate the world. On the other hand, love involves truth-telling. I heard you a few minutes ago. There was no lack of love in what you were saying. You were simply stating the truth. It's stating the truth, standing for justice, refusing to tolerate it, but without personally demonizing anyone. We can critique the system without personal demonization. And I think a lot of people are doing that right now, and that includes you. So, and is it difficult? Of course it's difficult. It was difficult for the abolitionists. It was difficult for the women suffragettes. It was difficult for the civil rights workers. But to you, Rebecca, I remind you also, we're American women. We're not porcelain dolls. These are troubled times. These are tough times. And I really believe that this is really a time to look deeply at our ancestors. Yes, there are ancestors who were murderers and slave owners and the worst of the worst. But we also have ancestors who were liberators. We also have ancestors who repudiated that, who pushed back, who carried humanity forward. And I think we're living at a time when, as important as it is to identify the problems in the past, We need to identify with the problem solvers. And yes, they were stressed. And yes, they were anxious. And yes, clearly they would have been traumatized, but they continued. They continued to walk. They continued to push. And I think that's what we're doing. And I think also we're doing it together. I think in a way, we need to maybe in a certain way give ourselves a little more credit than we're giving ourselves. A lot of people are rising up right now too, and trying to own our yes and own our no. Absolutely no, you cannot continue to do this to our children. You cannot continue to do this to our people. You cannot continue to do this to our planet. That doesn't mean I don't love you. But as Martin Luther King said, God said I have to love my enemies. He didn't say I have to like them.
Come on, somebody. Come on, somebody. I want to ask you about that a duality. Do you find ever that in your walk of love in these political spaces is matched by an equal amount of rage at the amount that our system just devastates human life? The complete and utter disregard for human life in the global South, the complete disregard for what's going on in Yemen, the casual disregard for the 22 lives that just were taken in the airstrikes in Syria. Like, I find that the more I love, the angrier I get at this system. What is that duality for you?
To me, it's like when you look at an Olympic level athlete, let's say an Olympic level, or let's say a tennis player at a place like Wimbledon. And that tennis player drops a ball, making a mistake they haven't made since they were 12 years old. They do not have the luxury of spending a fraction of a second going, oh, damn, they can't, they got to keep it. We don't have the luxury. So yesterday, for instance, I watched a few minutes of President Trump's speech. I saw all of those people standing up, going crazy, excited at the idea of his running a third time. I definitely know that that would be a path to fascism in America. And I felt the emotions, everything you're saying. And discipline, just the word disciple and the word discipline come from the same place. Marianne, no time. Every moment you spend going into anger or fear is a moment you should spend articulating the alternative, organizing for the alternative, inspiring and motivating for the alternative. Don't let it drag you in. In the Course in Miracles, it says, look at the crucifixion, but don't dwell on it. Look at it, know it's there, be informed, and don't spend one more moment leaking your energy and giving it to that, because your energy is so needed right now to create the alternative that will carry the day and take humanity in a different direction.
Whew. Oof. One last question from me. And because I have probably 1,000 questions, we could probably talk about this stuff for days. You came out very boldly for reparations, which is something that, you know, has been a pawn in the hands of a lot of politicians, including the Democratic Party. But you were unequivocal about descendants of enslaved Africans in this country being owed reparations. Could you just speak about your conviction around that issue and in any pushback that may have caught you off guard around pushing that issue?
My political views, as all of my views, rest on a foundation of spiritual principle, because I believe that spirituality is not just a different category of life. It is the underpinning, that which connects us to our deep humanity. Yeah. And a universal spiritual theme in all the great religious and spiritual systems is atonement. You can't move forward in life if you don't clean up the past. Whether it's Catholics going to confession or Jews on the day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement. In Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to admit your character defects. You have to own it where you've been wrong, and you've got to make it right. Yeah. So the more I studied about American history, I was writing a book called Healing the Soul of America in the late 90s. And I took a deep dive into American history more than I had before. I was already a liberal on social justice issues, including race. I was raised in that kind of a home. But the more I studied about American history, the more I got, whoa. And I saw that there's no way that the United States can go forward and have the life we want until we not only atone, but make amends. Now, in terms of the atonement, I had written a book in at the end of the 90s, Healing the Soul of America, including talk about how we needed reparations. And in my own work, I was already leading all over the country, not only racial healing circles, but these ritualized prayers where white people would apologize to Black people, and some very powerful things happened. But the more time went on, the more I realized, if you owe me $1,000, as much as I would appreciate the apology, I'd also like my money back.
Come on, somebody.
So I realized at a certain point, we can talk about white privilege all we want, but take a stand here. And for that matter, I'll tell you something else about reparations. We don't need another study.
Come on.
We know what happened. We
Yes.
don't need more evidence. We're going to have a bill to collect evidence. We know we have the evidence. It's right in front of us. It's time to put money on the table and to begin negotiations. So I was very clear about that. And this was one of the reasons why I ran. I definitely noticed that the conversation, as soon as I mentioned it on the stage, somebody came in and said, "Oh, we won't be talking about that." But to be honest, it was a woman of color who did that.
And
Yeah,
that's exactly.
that doesn't shock me. Look, that doesn't shock me at all. I'll say, Ben hit it right on the head. I was going to ask you about reparations and what that process was like for you, but for you, I think it's considered radical when you talk reparations, okay? And especially not being a Black person and being for that. And it's almost where if you speak about it, you know that your possible campaign can be doomed, but you still stood on that because you believe that. And you know what's right. You said something very, very important. We do not need another study. Listen, put the money on the table and let's begin negotiations. We know what happened. This should not be anything that we keep having to find information. If it happened, is there something that's going to change and say that we don't need reparations? Nothing's going to change. That was the history. That's what you guys did. This is what you guys didn't give us when it was promised to us. These are those kind of things that happen. And, but yes, you stood on such a radical a stance. And of course, it's going to be people who are in politics who want for their positions to still be protected. So they know they can't even speak the radicalization of speaking about reparations. So they know they can't even speak about that at all. So you definitely took a chance on that.
Yeah.
And I really, that's big.
Right.
I'd like to point out, though, something we all know. The whole idea of America is radical.
Yeah.
The very idea that there should be a society in which, to the best of our ability, we will create societal conditions where everyone, no matter who they are, has a chance to soar. Right. The ideal is radical. It has never been fully manifest, obviously, in this country. But there have been generations and groups of people who have tried, who have expanded the franchise, and who have, in every generation, pushed back against forces that would repudiate it. It's simply our turn. If you're not depressed, you're not looking. And if you're not radical, you're not taking things forward.
Yeah. Sister Williamson, you said something in this interview and we were getting ready to wrap it up, but you just contextualized something. You said this government is supposed to be a conduit for solutions. And instead it has become a roadblock to those solutions on behalf of a system that is detrimental to us and that we have to find new ways, new solutions. I would love for you to just speak about that again, but perhaps throw out some of the solutions that you're thinking that we can take, and then what the people in the audience can do to help enhance those solutions, because we got to do something.
Yes, indeed. Right now, our governmental policies do as much to thwart people's dreams as to support people's dreams. As a matter of fact, I think it could be argued that it does more to thwart people's dreams, the majority of people, than to support them. The underlying cancer, the cancer that underlies all the others, is the undue influence of money on our politics. Yeah. That more than anything. That with this massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a tiny percentage of Americans began with the trickle-down economics in 1980. But then in addition to that, when the Supreme Court began to give unlimited power, ultimately with Citizens United, to corporate interests and great wealth to influence campaigns as they have, this created an unholy alliance between extreme wealth and corporate power and government. Our government has become basically a system of legalized bribery, in which it does more to advocate for the financial short-term profit interests of these huge corporate interests than us. One major political party has been bought hook, line, and sinker into that mentality. They actually, they're unabashed about it.
Right.
The other major political party is really upset about it. And it tries to do what it can to minimize the suffering. But because on the periphery, but because of its own hostage, the fact that it too is hostage to its corporate donors, it too refuses to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. What can the average person do? Speak it, say it. Keep it up. Keep pushing. Do not be quiet. Do not let your exhaustion diminish your fervor. Do not let your trauma or your stress or your anxiety diminish your passion. Don't let them do it to you. Everything that you and I were saying before. Whether this will mean that the real left stops being peripheralized within the Democratic Party, or whether it means the left actually becomes a force, which it should be, given the numbers of people who agree with this outside those two parties, I don't know. I'm living with those questions inside my heart, just like everybody else is. But right now, the question is not, what are we going to do? The question is, will I do it, or will I be sucked in to a system that so wants to exhaust me that I lose my passion for the things for which I was born?
My God.
Well, Miss Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for even sharing what, your word, because I think I call that a word, right?
It's a word.
Good word.
That was a word.
Thank you so much for sharing your good word. We would love to have you back here. Before you leave, let the people know how they can reach you or follow you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, people can go to Marianne.com. People can also follow me, of course, on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook and all those places. I also have a podcast, the Marianne Williamson podcast. And all the nice, kind things that you just said to me, I say right back at you. Let none of us forget, we're all out there. There are a lot of us out there.
Yes.
More of us.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much once again, Ms. Williamson. And everyone, make sure you follow her, get on her podcast.
Get on that podcast, yes.
Yes, make sure you get on that podcast. I'm going to check it out, definitely.